With the WNBA season right in front of us, we cannot forget that the clock never really stops in the world of college basketball and college athletics. So we've got to bounce around with topics to keep us all up on the scouting report. It's Monday Musings today, right here on Locked On Women's Basketball.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Monday, friends. It is May 12th, 2025. Spring is here. It is baseball and softball season in the college ranks. The playoffs are also upon us for both you basketball and professional hockey fans. I am Missy Heidrick, national correspondent and college basketball analyst with The Next. Thank you for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And this episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA, all uppercase, at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Well, you can find me on all of the social channels at Missy Heidrick, and then follow this podcast at Locked On WBB. Then you've got to go follow and see all of my amazing colleagues for our 24/7, 365-day-a-year coverage of women's basketball at The Next, www.thenexthoops.com. Please go visit us, see us. There's more information there than almost one person can digest, and that is the way we like it. Well, before we get started today, and I walk you just through some of my thoughts and ideas of what's been going on in the world of college basketball and in college athletics now that the season is over. I first want to start, let's not forget, yesterday was Mother's Day. So a happy belated Mother's Day to all of the moms out there. As a mom myself, I know it might be the one day where you get to sleep in a little bit, you get an extra coffee from your family. I've got a very simple rule. I don't cook on Mother's Day, but we had great meals out as I watched my son play Little League Baseball yesterday. And just know that wherever your mother is, whether she's still here with you or not, and for all of those that are moms, that want to be moms, it doesn't matter how you get there and whether your kids have 2 legs or 4 legs. You do it all on a daily basis. So our hat is off to you. And it's graduation time. Let's not forget. So it could be pre-K all the way to PhDs. Happy graduation to all of the graduates out there and to the families, the parents, the friends, the aunts, the uncles, the siblings, the significant others who have helped your people get to that point. A fantastic accomplishment, should be celebrated. Cheers to all of our graduates and those that love them dearly. Well, it's crazy to think that it's almost the middle of May, and that means that the WNBA season starts in earnest in 1 week. But there's always room to talk about the topics, I think, swirling around the college game and college athletics, from coaching changes to house settlements, conference stability, and revenue sharing and the portal. It's all things to take notice to, and we can never let them out of our front and center. And so I'm going to do my best today to try to get you up to speed. I want to start with probably some of the things you've seen in the news over the last few weeks. It's been a topic of conversation now for years, going all the way back to 2021, when NIL came into our universe in the college athletic space. Name, image, and likeness. Student athletes being able to capitalize off the use of their name, image, and likeness, whether that was going to be in advertisements, TV, billboards, what was happening on campus, third parties. Then we got into the world of collectives. We started to figure out that maybe these student athletes weren't necessarily, it wasn't all above board. But then it all became clear that something was going to have to be done. With that said, this Olsen case has come to be, and that we have getting closer and closer now to what everyone talks about as the NCAA's house settlement. That the power conferences, ultimately the Power 4 conferences, because the Pac-12 does not exist at that power level anymore as we have known it before. We'll talk about conference stability in just a little bit. But that those Power 4 conferences created this settlement, understanding that if they didn't do this within the court system, that there was going to be a never-ending barrage of lawsuits. Now, that's still not to be something that we can rule out. I think all of the pieces of the puzzle, when you start to dissect the House settlement and some of the things that are going to come about it, they very well could put us right back into a host of different kinds of lawsuits and litigation. That's just the way this is going to do. But give credit, because these leagues, they understood their leadership. We've got to come to some sort of consensus. With that said, in October of 2024, a federal judge granted a preliminary approval of the House versus NCAA settlement that would change this landscape as we know it. Yet again, we saw it change with NIL, but it changes in this way. Essentially, it laid out a plan for the NCAA institutions that opt into this settlement to be able to compensate student athletes directly, starting with the 25-26 school year. According to estimates, the permissive cap imposed by the settlement could be somewhere in the vicinity of $20 to $22 million per school. And that there would be a significant changes as well then to how name, image, and likeness opportunities would be governed and overseen moving forward. So we've all heard about revenue sharing. We'll talk a little bit more about the impact that has had in coaching searches, even in women's basketball, in just a few minutes. But this is where we talk about revenue sharing, that every school, if you opt into the settlement, that you are committing to raise anywhere between 20 to 22 or as much as you can. And then that money would then be paid directly to the student athletes. This settlement also includes back pay for NIL related activities to past student athletes. That's one kind of piece of the puzzle as well. Well, the settlement was not approved back in April, early the first week of April, right after the Final Four on April 7th. A federal judge, Claudia Wilkin out of California, did not approve the settlement because she sent it back with a couple stipulations, things that needed to be addressed. One was providing a phased-in period for implementation of the new roster limits that had been agreed upon or grandfather in current athletes on rosters. And then there was also needed to be an adjustment of language related to binding future student athletes, those that would be coming to institutions, to this 10-year settlement. So let's backtrack a moment. What does it have to do with roster limits? Well, in agreement to this, a change has been made at the NCAA level. No longer would it be just about scholarship limits. It would be about roster limits. So you have X amount of spaces. We've all heard within the scope over the last few months, especially at the college football level, that number has gone down from the 120s to 105. That means coaches are having to make cuts to their roster. There are no spaces for these student athletes according to those numbers. Well, as the judge brought up in that April 7th ruling, when she did not approve the settlement, was that she didn't necessarily agree, that they thought there had to be movement there to figure out a way that these student athletes just up and don't have a spot anymore. All right, let's fast forward to this week. Host of conversations going on amongst the Power Four conferences, and the NCAA and the Power Four conferences are revising rules around roster limits in the hopes that this is how they can get this settlement approved by Judge Wilkin out of California. Ultimately, a filing was made last week in the first week of May that would allow schools to permit them to grandfather in a range of student athletes. One, those currently on a roster. Two, those athletes who have already been cut this year, that they would be able to come back and be grandfathered in for the season. And three, those high school recruits who enrolled at a school after committing to a roster position only to see eliminated. That happens a lot, we know, in college football, maybe not as much in the other sports or in college basketball, but you have a lot of young men who graduate in December. They go to those institutions with the thought that they are going to be participating in spring ball, their training, etc. And then they are not allowed to be able, then now that position or their spot has been eliminated. With that said, those are the things that have happened. Will this come to fruition? Will this be enough? Ultimately, it permits schools to do that, but it does not require them. And I think that has been the hang up with the NCAA and with the power conferences, is that they want to force institutions to have to do this. They are going to permit them to do that. Keep in mind, there has been now word and a statement has been made from Notre Dame. Their athletic director, who is new this year, Pete Bavacqua, he has said that they will honor roster spots of all current student athletes and permit those who were cut to return for the 25-26 year. So that is one institution at the Power 5 level. And we know Notre Dame has a very unique setup. They are part of the ACC, but not when it comes to football. They stand alone and are independent, but they have made that statement. So that is the one thing to keep your eye on. They are looking and working to figure out a way that they can move this forward. Unclear whether or not Judge Wilkin out of California is going to accept these changes, but it looks as though there is going to be another ruling by the judge coming quickly and something to keep your eyes on. All right, we'll talk about revenue sharing and how that is impacting coaching searches and what it looks like for women's basketball in just a moment. Hi, everybody. Missy Heidrick, and welcome back to Locked On Women's Basketball. It's Monday Musings. We're jumping all over, talking about a variety of different topics. The first one we've talked about here today has been about the House settlement and what comes next. You're going to hear a lot in the news all over the place, and I would direct you all, I think someone who's done a fantastic job of breaking it down in very simplistic terms. Ross Dellinger works with Yahoo Sports. He's got a great article that was published last week, really to kind of outline what some of those things are, what are the things to keep your eye on. But as we've said, it's about roster limits, and it's about cutting some of these total roster numbers down, eliminating those roster spots. Is there a way they can be grandfathered in? The conferences have decided that they would permit institutions to do it, but they would not require them to do it. Notre Dame has come out and said that they would be one of the first. And with that said, then it all goes back to sort of this stability, instability that we have seen rocketing through college sports over the last few years. We can go all the way back to the summer when the bombshell was dropped on all of us prior to the Olympics, and see coming right out of COVID, where we saw Oklahoma and Texas were making the joint statement that they were leaving the Big 12 and headed to the SEC, that they were going to continue to bolster the Southeastern Conference and create sort of this juggernaut within college athletics. Absolutely true. It left a lot of people wondering what would happen to the Big 12. Well, give credit, because they were able to find themselves a stable leg to stand on. And that goes back to the previous commissioner, Bob Bowlesby. He went out and got 4 new schools in BYU, Houston, UCF, and Cincinnati that kind of put the clamps on it, allowed the Big 12 to have that stability themselves. There was a change in leadership at the Big 12. Brett Yormark took over, and really, I think, brought a whole host of new ideas and concepts coming from the professional sports world, and really a different type of business model as it relates to college athletics. One that we all know thrives and is because of television revenue and the numbers that people deal with. Ultimately, a year and a half ago, we then saw the Pac-12 decimate. This time last season, a year ago, we were talking about the last of everything in the Pac-12. The last football games, the last college basketball games, the last college basketball postseason tournaments. Then it was into baseball and softball, track and field, swimming, you pick it. The Pac-12 was gone. Well, some of those places needed a home. And Brett Yormark and the Big 12 found Arizona, Arizona State, Colorado, and Utah, all looking for a place to go, because UCLA, USC, Oregon, and Washington had found their home. They were headed to the Big 10, which was still a question no one could understand. But the 4 corner schools end up at the Big 12, and it has solidified this league. And you think about where some of these teams have been and who is competing at the top level within these leagues. Some of them new. Arizona State, for instance, they were the Big 12 conference. They were the Big 12 conference football champion. Houston men's basketball, just in the league for only a couple years, and now they are into the Final Four. You look at women's basketball, and they have had a juggernaut. And we'll talk about some of those coaching changes. Some of them have been with those 4 new schools. But regardless, Brett Yormark with a very visionary mind, and he now has reached an extension and has been voted on by the Big 12 Board of Directors, as it was announced last week. And they voted to extend the commissioner's contract for additional 3 years through the 2029-2030 academic year. And ultimately, for someone that started that job at the end of June in 2022 and began his tenure on August 1st, 2022, this has been a lightning rod of an individual within the Big 12. I've had the opportunity myself to interview Commissioner Yormark. He's got great vision, great people around him, and I think this league is destined to do good things. There is a couple things about the Big 12, though, that we know are different than some of the others. They don't have a quote-unquote linear channel like the SEC network or ACC network or the Big 10 network. It does change things a little bit, but the Big 12 knows that they have positioned themselves with not only the CFP, but how they have come onto the landscape and really been a juggernaut within college basketball on both the women's and the men's side. And that is one thing that is irreplaceable. It's been a high level of focus for the commissioner and for the conference office. They know that they can be the elite of elite when it comes to both men's and women's basketball. So congratulations to Commissioner Yormark, an extension and that stability and what that looks like. And I think in these very uncertain times, as these institutions all across the country in both small, mid-majors, as well as the power conferences try to navigate what this house settlement's going to look like, what these roster limits are going to look like, how revenue sharing is going to impact all of their daily lives. Well, then we know that you have to have stability at the top, and you have to have someone who understands and is willing to think about outside the box, different revenue sources and opportunities. They've done that at the Big 12, and Brett Yormark there now for an additional 3 years. When we come back, conference stability, while it means a lot, stability for institutions and new leagues also means high expectations for success. And that does equal some coaching changes. We saw some in the Big 12 and all across the country, a few that caught our eye when we come back. Hi, everyone. Missy Heidrick, and thank you for joining us today here on Locked On Women's Basketball. It's May 12th, 2025. Happy Monday to everyone out there. And a belated Mother's Day and happy graduation, as we said at the very beginning as well. Well, this time of year, and we saw, and it started even before the end of the season, that there was going to be a host and a rash of coaching changes. The portal is something we'll talk about at a later date, because I still don't feel like we maybe have a real sense of where everyone has landed. Not every student athlete has found a home. And I think it's still too difficult to tell who really is going to reap the benefits the most of some of the pickups that they made in the portal with student athletes. So I think that's a conversation we have at a later time. But we can talk about coaching changes, because this is something that is consistently has to be part of the puzzle. You know that summer recruiting is going to happen for high school kids. There are still a lot of players that are out in the portal. Some of those still need to find a home, and these coaches are scouring that, thinking about what they may need. Also, if you're a new coach, you've got to re-recruit the people that were staying or that were at that school when you got there. All of that is a big piece. And we back up a little bit. We talk about that $20 to $22 million that if a school opts into the settlement, and we talk about revenue sharing, that money going directly to the student athletes. I think one of the biggest questions that we heard all across the month of March and into April with coaching changes happening at these institutions, what is going to be the percentage of that money that is given to women's basketball? How much does a coach have to give out and divvy out to student athletes? Because it no longer is about a collective in terms of doing it on a third-party idea and being able to funnel money to student athletes for NIL-related activities. NIL-related activities are going to be monitored and overseen by a third party that has been designated by the NCAA. That now is separate. Revenue share, direct payments. So we heard some of these large scale numbers. Some of those were trying to happen before July 1, if and when this house settlement goes into effect. But after that point, all of these coaches who have taken over these programs, you can bet that one of the biggest questions in the interview process has been, what is your commitment to women's basketball, and where do we live in your revenue sharing percentages? They need to know what money they have to be able to use for incoming recruits as well as for kids in the portal. With that said, Here's a few that really kind of, in terms of coaching changes, that struck my eye. I'll tell you one, which I think is a great hire. I was surprised that the University of Nebraska Omaha parted ways with Carrie Banks after she had been there. I believe this was year 5 at Omaha for the Mavericks, but I think a great hire and someone who is going to do a fantastic job is Jamie Carey. She has been the associate head coach at the University of Texas under Karen Aston, and then now at UTSA. She has been with her. She played at Texas. She's got a great basketball mind, and I think she's going to do a fantastic job at Omaha. You can see they have a commitment to basketball at Omaha. They do not have football. It's not something that impacts them. They've got Division I hockey, and they've got really good men's basketball, and they have an opportunity to put that program in the Summit League towards the top of the standings. I think Jamie Carey is a really good hire. Keep your eye on that one. There was a coaching change in a multitude of Big 12 schools this year. Let's start with Arizona. Adia Barnes, who is no longer the head coach at Arizona, she left to take over the job at SMU. It was very interesting. She took over this job. Adia Barnes took the Arizona job back in 2016, and she is an alum of Arizona. She played there from 94 to 98. They also appeared in the 2021 NCAA championship game, but she leaves after a 19-14 season in their first year in the Big 12. They went 10-8 in conference play. It was a surprise, but there was a lot of undertones and currents conversation about whether or not Adia Barnes, and this was really a good fit anymore now in the Big 12. She's no longer there. She's going to go build something at SMU. Enter Becky Burke, who is going to take over, comes from Buffalo. Burke is going to spend the last 3 seasons there. They had 30 wins in the 2024-25 season. They went on to win the WNIT title. She had also been part as 2 seasons at USC Upstate. She played at Louisville, so she's got Power 5 experience. High energy, a very different feel than what you saw from Adia Barnes. That will be Becky Burke on the sidelines for Arizona as she wades into a very difficult women's basketball world of the Big 12. The other one to think about there is going to be Arizona State. There was a change at the leadership there. They knew they had to make a change. Natasha Adair, who had come from Delaware, just wasn't getting it done. With that said, now you have Molly Miller, who is going to step into those shoes. So both head coaches at the Arizona schools, 2 of the 4 corner schools that came into the Big 12 a year ago, new coaches. Also, you could say Utah has a new coach, and that really more or less is just simply because there was a change at the top earlier in the year, and that position was given to the associate head coach. This was his first full year in charge there for Gavin Peterson. But I think that kind of counts if you want to look at it that way. But Arizona and Arizona State, Molly Miller, after really putting the Grand Canyon University program on the map in the WAC, they get themselves into the NCAA tournament, almost had an opportunity to knock off Baylor on their home court, couldn't get it done in the first round. But regardless, she is headed to Tempe. Doesn't have to move, stays right in that familiar territory for her. And I think that is a win-win hire for Arizona State. There is also a change in the ACC at Georgia Tech. Nell Fortner has retired. The news was also just released last week that she's going to take over as the head coach of the Canadian national team as they think about the upcoming Olympic Games. So a very interesting move for Nell Fortner. But Fortner is retiring as she had 15 seasons as a college head coach. She had been 6 years at Georgia Tech. And she was also named Coach of the Year in 3 different Division I conferences and guided Team USA to that Olympic gold medal in 2000. The new head coach at Georgia Tech is going to be Karen Blair. And Blair was at Maryland for the past 5 years, including the past 5 as the associate head coach there under Brenda Fries. They won 3 Big Ten championships. And before that, she had been an assistant coach at a host of other places, including SMU, which was her alma mater. So Karen Blair takes over into the ACC, somewhat familiar territory back in the day because Maryland was an ACC school before it went there. But now she is the head coach for the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets. Another interesting one that I thought more at that mid-major level, but there was a lot of conversation early in the year when the head coach, Kontras-Imagn, left to become the head coach, when Kontras-Imagn, left to become the head coach of the Atlanta Dream early in the season. With that said, Chelsea Lyles was announced as the head coach, stepping in for him, taking over this season. She had been on his staff. They finished 30-3, 18-0 in the Atlantic Sun. They won their conference title. They were in the NCAA tournament, but she decided that she was going to join his staff in the Atlanta Dream. With that said, stepping down from that position, and Raina Harmon now takes over as the head coach of Florida Gulf Coast. She has been the assistant coach at Iowa for the last 8 years. So obviously great connections to the world of Caitlin Clark and all the things there. But I thought it was very interesting that move was made. And we all know coaching is about right fit, ladies and gentlemen, just as we think about it for a student athlete and finding the right program. You've got to have the right fit, and you have to want to be in that job. These are tough jobs. This is a tough time in college basketball and college athletics, and sometimes it just isn't the right time for an individual. So hats off to Chelsea Lyles for making that decision for herself. Raina Harmon's going to step into a very good program in the Atlantic Sun and Florida Gulf Coast. We also saw the retirement of Doug Bruno at DePaul. He is going to has stepped down, and that he had been on an indefinite leave since early October of 2024 after suffering a medical incident. But associate head coach Jill Pizzotti, she was promoted to take over. She led the Blue Demons this year. They finished as 13-19 and 8-10 in the Big East, one of those off years for DePaul. But I look for this program to rebound, and she will now be a full and official head coach. Another one of those Big 12 coaching changes that we saw this season that comes at BYU, a bit of a surprise. Amber Whiting, who was let go after 3 seasons there at BYU. She is a BYU alum. Her husband, also a BYU alum. Her daughter, Amari, who was a sophomore on the team, then subsequently entered the portal. She will land at Oklahoma State. Associate head coach Lee Kamard, who had taken over as an interim head coach when Amber Whiting was let go. He was promoted to the role permanently. And as we know, BYU is so many interesting dynamics there. But Kamard had been a member of the men's basketball team from 2005 to 2009 and also been part of that program. And he'd been on the staff since 2019. So many different connections for him. Seemed like the logical choice, the decision that they wanted to make. But it is also not without some repercussions with Amari Whiting, the daughter of Amber Whiting, transferring out. But Delaney Gibb committing, Big 12 Freshman of the Year, committing to come back to BYU next season. That was a huge get for the Cougars. So there's another coaching change that we have seen in the Big 12. We're going to migrate a little bit, and I can tell you that there was a change in leadership at Arkansas. Mike Neighbors out. There was a lot of names, a lot of people that were brought up to maybe be candidates for this job out in the social media sphere. None of those names actually landed, but they did, with someone who I have had the opportunity to be around quite a bit, covered her, have had the chance to be on the call for her games, Kelsey Musick from Oral Roberts. She is going to take over at Arkansas. And that was one of those where she led them to a second place finish in the Summit League this past year, third place in her second year in Tulsa. Last year, they made program history with their first 20-win season. They did it again this year with over 20 wins for Oral Roberts, building a brand, building a program there. Kelsey Musick goes to Arkansas into the teeth of the SEC. But we know that there is an opportunity to recruit to Arkansas. There's a ton of talent in that state, and it can be a great place for young ladies out of the portal to transfer and to land. With that said, Sophie Anderson, who had been the associate head coach under Kelsey Musick, they had worked together for many, many years. She takes over at Oral Roberts. She is the second new head coach, along with Jamie Carey in the Summit League. The other that I will give you is going to be the change at North Dakota. One I think that sort of surprised a lot of people, because Molly Barnhart, who has been a UND alum, she steps down from that role as the head coach. The associate head coach at the time, Dennis Hutter, he will take over. Now 3 new coaches in the Summit League. Another new head coach in the Big 12, Ron Huey, no longer the head coach at Houston, and in a familiar face in college basketball in the women's game, Matthew Mitchell, most recently the head coach at Kentucky from 2007 to 2020, and included over 300 wins, 9 NCAA appearances, 3 Elite 8 runs, and 5 Sweet 16 trips. And he is part of the Pat Summitt coaching tree, having been an assistant and understanding and knowing how to do that. Obviously, someone who built a program at Kentucky, stepped away because of his own medical issues and health-related scenarios, comes back and is going to take over the job at Houston. I think there's great opportunity to build something there, no doubt about it. And one other job where we saw a trickle-down effect, Robin Pinkston, her contract not renewed at Missouri. In comes Kelly Harper, another familiar face in the SEC. She had been fired a year ago, contract not renewed at Tennessee, took a year off. She is back at Missouri, familiar with the state, having spent time as the head coach at Missouri State. I think that will be a very interesting dynamic to see how Kelly Harper manages the SEC at a new school that's not her alma mater, a very different feel. Will Mizzou commit to women's basketball? That's a big question. Goes back to that rev share conversation that you have to have when you are interviewing for these positions. Then the opening at Wisconsin, Marissa Mosley, no longer the head coach there. She stepped down after 4 seasons in to replace her. Robin Pinkston, who had just been not renewed at the University of Missouri. So a SEC to Big Ten swap. They make all of those. Well, I just want to thank everybody for tuning in today and kind of walking through all of these different things for me. I encourage you, go read up, find Ross Dellinger's column and articles at yahoosports.com. Does a great job of breaking down everything you need to know about all of the world of the House settlement and what is there to be. There's going to be new rulings. There's going to be new information. We've got to keep our eye on it. And all of these coaching changes we've talked about, there was a ton more around the country. They will be on our radar as we think about the upcoming season coming this summer. Well, you can find me at Missy Heidrick on Twitter, and all of my amazing colleagues, please go follow us and see us at thenexthoops.com, and then follow this podcast at Locked On WBB. Come back. You'll be caught up all week. The WNBA season is right in front of us. Previews, podcasts, everything you need, it's all right here. And thank you for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen today. For your second listen, check out Locked On NBA Game Night. Every game, every night, until an NBA champion is crowned. Get local analysis on a national scale. Find NBA Game Night on Locked On NBA on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. Have a great week, everybody. We will see you next time.